I would like to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to the Right Honourable Herb Gray Lecture for 2021, Ode to Staffers, Tales from the Trenches. I'm Heather Bakken, publisher of iPolitics, and I am absolutely honoured to be your moderator for tonight's discussion. Please note this event is being recorded and will be posted on Carleton's Political Management website and social media for public viewing. That's at carleton.ca under Academics and Graduate Programs. A link to the posted recording will also be shared with registrants after the event. All participants' microphones and cameras are turned off. Our panelists, on the other hand, are full screen, mic'd up, and ready to share their stories from the trenches. So let's get to it. So tonight we're joined by Kevin Bosch, Vice President of Public Affairs at Helen Knowlton and member of the Liberal campaign team. Hamish Marshall was a Conservative Party National Campaign Manager for the 2019 election, and Anne McGrath is a New Democratic Party's National Director. So let's start with you, Anne. We have a lot of students watching here tonight, so I'm wondering if you could please give me the Coles Notes version of your career and why you got into politics.
Wow. Well, I think I've probably been in politics from a very young age. I met a friend from high school a while ago, and she said, "Oh, I remember when you were campaigning in high school against apartheid in South Africa and all of those kinds of things, and for girls to be able to participate in the newspaper and all of that sort of stuff." So I've been involved for a long time. I got involved in federal politics in about 2000, 2001 after moving here from Alberta. I had been a candidate in Alberta and run there and done a lot of things in provincial politics, but federally I got involved in about 2001, I would say, organizing for Jack Layton's leadership campaign. So, and I was with Jack for the entire time in a variety of different roles. And I was actually counting up the other day, and I think I've participated or in a kind of a leadership role, I guess, in about 24 campaigns, you know, and it's at every level. I've participated at the local level, in by-elections and at the riding level, at the provincial level, at the federal level, and in a whole bunch of different roles because I can't hold down a job. But I've been a manager, an organizer, a candidate, a spokesperson, all sorts of different things. And currently, of course, as you know, I'm working with Jagmeet Singh and the NDP caucus, and working really hard to increase the strength of the New Democrats in the Parliament.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Hamish, let's move over to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's sort of fun to be here. I always got a soft spot for Carleton in my heart because my father graduated from Carleton in 1966. So I've always grew up with Carleton as something that was spoken about a lot. And as a Vancouverite now exiled to Toronto, that always meant something. I've been involved in politics since university. I signed up for the Conservative Party the first day in undergrad. And for the last 25 years or so, I've been volunteering and working in and around conservative politics. I grew up in one of those families where we talked about politics a lot around the dining room table. It was considered, normal. And the other thing about our family is we were very much brought up to believe that if you believe something, you should do something about it. So the idea of getting involved in politics was an extremely natural thing. I worked in Ontario government in my Harris years. I worked in opposition for a guy called Stephen Harper. I kept on leaving. Moved back to BC, lived in Afghanistan for a while, lived in England for a while, but eventually came back when we won government in 2006. Worked in the 2006 campaign, the 2008 campaign, and then in the spring of or the summer of 2016, my old friend Andrew Scheer, who I'd been a staffer with, called me up and said, I want to run for leader. And I said, okay. And, for the next 3 and a bit years, my life was completely devoted to running first his successful leadership campaign, and then running the national campaign, where we won 6.2 million votes.
Thank you very much, Hamish. Kevin, over to you.
So as you mentioned, I'm Vice President of Public Affairs at Helen Knowlton now, but I think I'm here tonight because I worked on Parliament Hill for 19 years with every Liberal leader from Jean Chrétien up to Justin Trudeau. I worked in 6 election campaigns from 2000 to 2015. We had a lot of elections in that period. I led the opposition research in many of those elections. I got involved in politics. I'm from Alberta, like Anne, from Calgary. I remember going back to grade 6, I was interested in public affairs, and made me a bit unusual for someone in grade 6. And got involved with the provincial Liberal Party, and went to work for them in 1993, and didn't look back. I've been involved in politics ever since. And I see from the chat there, Heather, I think they're ready to do the video before we have our discussion.
Okay, so everyone, you're in for a real treat. We have a video that will celebrate the Right Honourable Herb Gray, and we'll come right out of that and get to the panel discussion. Enjoy the video.
Good evening. Welcome to the second annual Right Honourable Herb Gray Lecture, brought to you by the Clayton H. Riddell Graduate Program in Political Management. My name is Stephen Otzi. I am the director of the program. The Riddell program was founded in 2011, at least in part, to foster dialogue across political divides, to listen to what the other side had to say, and to subject ideas and opinions to critical examination and debate. We offer a one-year master's degree for individuals who work in politics or who aspire to work in politics, whether that be for an elected representative at the federal, provincial, or municipal level, or in a government relations function, for lobbying firms, for national associations, for non-governmental organizations, or for corporations, or individuals who work as communications consultants or pollsters. Tonight, we have an unusual lecture in the sense that it's not a lecture at all. It's a panel discussion hosted by the distinguished Canadian journalist Heather Bakken, and featuring 3 of Canada's leading political practitioners. But before we get to that, we have a treat for you. We have some tales from the trenches from some of the biggest names in Canadian politics. So please sit back, make yourself comfortable, and enjoy this evening's event. Thank you.
Herb Gray's public face was one of quiet competence. He was a steady hand in cabinet, and he was a genius for staying out of trouble. He was easily lampooned as Gray Herb. But his heart beat with a passion for social justice and for reducing inequality and for achieving that common good. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, it highlighted the social and economic gaps that our country now needs to close. The Right Honourable Gray's values are more relevant in Canada than ever as we work to build back better. Which brings me to another moment in time in 2003, earlier in my career, with a Liberal government returned to power in a minority situation. I learned a lot from Jim Peterson, who was Trade Minister at the time under Paul Martin. Jim and Paul were known for their kindness and for the respect that they showed to staff and to people on all sides. Jim modeled civility and he modeled respect, and at no time was that more important than in a minority government situation back in 2003. Everyone has a responsibility to make Parliament work, no matter the form. It's challenging and it's irritating, but also satisfying, and it can be productive. This will play a big role in successfully building back better in 2021 and beyond. So as a new staffer and new to politics in 2003, I tried in my own way to follow these examples. Suddenly I knew very well that my personal brand and the way I approached my role would follow me wherever I go. Jim and Heather Peterson reminded us almost daily through their constituency work and the deep care for their community and those around them that it's not the position you hold, but it's how you turn that position into change and meaningful connection with people. For me, that translated to the fact that it wasn't about the desk I held, but rather how I held it, and I won't ever forget it. So in 2021, as we worry about the chaos of American politics and remember that values like these, like those of the Right Honourable Herb Gray, are the glue that holds our democracies together. Living by the values of Herb and of Jim is our best defense, in our best way to keep building the common good.
My Herb Gray story is from 1998. One day he was standing in during question period for my old boss, Paul Martin, who at that time was the Minister of Finance. He marched in the Commons, took many questions on Mr. Martin's behalf. Because he was Herb Gray, of course, he offered exactly 0 answers, but he did manage to cover the Commons in a sort of blanket of tranquility that raised 0 political jeopardy. Marched back into the lobby afterwards, and how did I do? Fantastic, sir, very good. I said there was One slight mistake I noticed, I think a statistic you mentioned was incorrect. He stopped and looked at me. What do you mean? So, it's no big deal. Write it down. Write down what I said and write down what I should have said. I put it on a piece of paper and handed it to him. He marched back into the House of Commons, rose on a point of privilege, apologized to the members of the House, and corrected the record right then and there. Came back into the lobby and said, "Gee, Mr. Gray, wow, took that a little seriously, didn't you?" He said, "Look, if I had permitted the record to stand when I knew that I had said something incorrect, I would be abusing the privileges of every single member of Parliament, including myself. It's a matter of integrity." And that was Herb Gray. In a time of Trump Twitter and constant political misinformation, it's hard to even believe that within our memory, people acted that way and people conducted themselves in that way. But Herb Gray did, and it wasn't that long ago, and I was glad to work for him, even if it was just for that one day.
My story involves Preston Manning, leader of the Reform Party of Canada, and Ian Todd. Ian is currently Ontario's trade representative in Washington, but at the time, he was Preston's executive assistant. Now, Ian is a kind-hearted, lovable, gentle fellow, except when it comes to political events. When it comes to political events, he's all business. Everything has to be perfect. Everything has to be just right. Anyways, we were at some event in Lethbridge or Medicine Hat, I can't remember which, in the community hall there. And Preston was getting ready to give a big speech. I don't know whether it was a fundraiser or a rally, or maybe we were creating a new party, which is something we seem to do every 5 years or so. Anyways, the hall looked perfect. There was a great crowd, lots of energy. The thundersticks were thumping. The signs were where they should be. All of the flags were perfectly ironed. Everything looked beautiful. And Ian was in his element backstage. He had his headphone on. He was barking out orders. Everything looked great. Then suddenly, just as we were about to get underway, there was some crisis. And Ian had to solve it. Nobody else would do. It had to be Ian. So Ian looked around the room frantically, trying to find somebody responsible, but obviously couldn't see anybody except for me in the corner. Now, I can't remember what I think I was writing a news release or taking a nap, making a real contribution to the success of the evening. Ian came running over and said, "Armour, there is nobody else. Your job is to get Preston Manning on that stage at 7:42. Not 7:41, not 7:43, but 7:42. And then he fixed me with this glare, like he was a Marine drill sergeant. "If you screw this up, you will wish that you'd never been born." And with that, he left. Well, the thought of an execution certainly focused my mind, and I blocked everything else out and focused entirely at the task at hand. I was like the guy in the movie trying to disarm the bomb, with one eye on the clock and then trying to figure out whether to cut the blue wire or the red wire. So I just sat there, sweating buckets, with Preston on my right hand, watching the clock tick down. Finally, we were just a shade off of 7:42. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. And then, like I was shooting parachuters out of the plane, it was go, 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 go. And out walked Preston through those curtains onto the stage. And I can't describe the relief. All I could think about was just how happy Ian was going to be with me and how well I had done. It was then that I started to listen and gain some awareness of my surroundings. And then, to my absolute horror, I realized that I had sent Preston Manning out on stage to Man, I Feel Like a Woman by Shania Twain. So there you have it. There's my story. I don't think there's any real meaning, any lessons to be learned, but it did involve music, which would please Mr. Gray, though his taste tended to lean towards heavy metal. Rock on, Herb.
In my early days as press secretary to Brian Mulroney, I had a problem. The Parliamentary Press Gallery, preoccupied with the Liberal leadership contest to replace Pierre Trudeau, was basically ignoring us. So we decided to hit the road for what we affectionately dubbed the Boonies Tour. Tens of thousands of kilometers in small planes, drafty buses, nondescript rental cars. We worked on our stagecraft skills, and most importantly, we listened to community activists, to Indigenous leaders, to township councillors, to small business owners, union members, and the folks who called into local talk radio. We tested the policies and program specifics of our platform against the real-life experiences of people who lived in places like Castlegar, British Columbia, and Shipignon, Nouveau-Brunswick. Sun Tzu, centuries ago, said battles are basically won before they are fought. The result of the 1984 federal election is a matter of Canadian electoral history. But I will always believe that the building blocks of the win were put in place on the Boonies Tour.
My first job as a political staffer was as a policy advisor to the Treasury Board Minister, who at the time was John Baird. And one of the John's tasks was to lead an exercise to find $1 billion in spending cuts from across government. And we'd done that, we'd spent months on it. There was a committee of ministers who were looking at them. A copy of all the proposals had gone to the Prime Minister's office. And then one day, first thing in the morning, we got a call from that office saying the Prime Minister wants to meet with your minister in an hour. And the Chief of Staff wasn't around, he wasn't there that day, and there was nobody else senior. And so I got a call from my Chief of Staff on the road saying, Dan, I need you to go with the boss to this meeting. So having walked into the office that morning, not expecting it at all, an hour later I find myself sitting in a boardroom across the table from the Prime Minister, and who is asking my boss questions. And you know, he was not saying, present to me, explain this. He would say, turn to page 35, how do you explain this? Turn to page 50, what's this about? And a couple of them, my boss turned to me and said, Dan, and there I was presenting the Prime Minister. Pretty amazing experience.
As a fellow in the Riddell Masters of Political Management program at Carleton, what inspired me to get involved is I was a political assistant. And in those days, with no training, you just had to get to know things, ask a lot of questions, and that's how I navigated my way through. My office was on the same floor as Pierre Elliott Trudeau's office, and my boss also sat with Mr. Trudeau, so we got to interact with the former Prime Minister quite a bit. I also got to know great people like Ed Broadbent and Herb Gray. Also, his wife was wonderful. Sharon always talked to me like I was a friend, a colleague, not just a young political assistant, but she was there also to share information as to what it was like to run two households. I found it very enlightening. I also had the opportunity just before the center block shut down for a decade to go visit my old office. So I hope you enjoy the pictures. Thanks very much, with an expression of gratitude to all of you. Thanks very much.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I love that it ended with a shot of Herb Gray's better half. You know, they say behind every great man, there's a woman, and that was certainly the case with a feminist pioneer in on the Hill and the precinct. Anyway, I would like to start the panel discussion. We have, obviously, we're joined by three political pugilists. We're asked them to take off the gloves tonight because really the I guess the purpose of tonight's discussion is to shed some light on the process, and more importantly, to do that through storytelling. And you do have 3 professional storytellers on the panel tonight. So just to start off on a right foot, Kevin, can you just share your proudest moment in politics?
Geez, well, many proud moments, but my proudest one was pulling off a fundraiser involving Herb Gray. So I'm happy to tell you that story. 2011, you may remember, was a bit of a bad election for Liberals. I think Anne experienced it differently, but it was a pretty down time for Liberals. We didn't, it's entirely possible the NDP could have replaced us as the Progressive Party on the left. And so we really need to raise money for the party and also to keep profile and life in the party. And so we decided to have a fundraiser, and we really needed to have a good showing. And so we decided we'd do it as a tribute to Herb Gray, and because we knew Herb would bring everyone else, they would fill the room, and he did. And Paul Martin was there, and John Turner was there, and Justin Trudeau was there. Everybody came to it, and Herb had a wonderful sense of humor, as everyone knows, and so he let us make a bunch of buttons for this fundraiser, and I dug them out for this event here. So it may be hard to sort of see it on the screen there, so I'll describe it to you there. This one says 50 Shades of Gray, and you can see the handcuffs dangling off of Herb's wrist there. But my personal favorite was this one. This is Herb in full Rastafarian garb there, and the slogan is, "I'm addicted to the Herb." So I was very proud. We had a very successful event, and definitely a highlight for my political career.
I will point out for our audience that was being addicted to the herb was prior to the legislation that made that legal. So
right, yeah. On the vanguard.
Hamish, what about you? What has been your proudest moment in politics?
I think in 2015. The province of British Columbia decided to hold a referendum about tagging on half a point to the PST in the Vancouver metro region in order to allegedly pay for a transit plan. And everybody was in favor of it. The provincial Christy Clark's government, the provincial Liberal was in favor of it. The NDP was in favor of it. All the city councils were in favor of it. All the big unions were in favor of it. The Board of Trade was in favor of it. The David Suzuki Foundation was in favor of it. And they all put in money. The cities poured in millions and millions of dollars for a yes campaign to get people to vote to raise the PST. I didn't think this was such a good idea. I thought that a little bit of common sense, a little bit of saving, and a little bit of prioritizing would allow us to build this transit we needed without raising taxes on one of the most expensive places to live in the world. So I got together with my friend Jordan Bateman at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and we cobbled together $40,000. They spent $7 million. We just went on the attack, put together a campaign plan, stuck to the campaign plan. We started out in the polls 15 points down. We won 62-38. Absolutely crushed them, outspent 160 to 1. And the entire establishment, including very good friends of mine. I had a very good friend of mine say to me, "You can't do this. This is going to destroy your business. Everybody in Vancouver is going to hate you for being on the wrong side of this. You have to, you can't do it. You're making a huge mistake." And to be fair, he probably made a lot more money out of his losing campaign than I did out of my winning one. But winning felt very, very good.
I think we should pin that thought, because later in the discussion, I'd like to come back to some of those odds beaters, and maybe we can revisit what Bill said in terms of, battles are won before they're lost. That would be your influence. And what is your proudest moment in politics?
Oh, that's a really hard question, but I remember the event, the campaign that Hamish is talking about, and the one that Kevin was talking about, from different perspectives in both of those campaigns, being involved in them. I think one of the moments that I remember, there's lots, but one that I remember really well was in 2015, being with Rachel Notley when we formed government in Alberta. And watching the results come in. And at one point, well, there was several things that happened that evening, but one of the things that happened was we had the speech all kind of worked out and everything like that, and she was going to go. We walked out of the suite. We were in a suite, we walked out of the suite and the security were right there. And I remember they kept saying as we were going down in the freight elevator, you know, the premier-elect is on her way down. And she said, can you make them stop saying that? And I was like, no, you're the premier-elect. But one of the things I remember saying while we were getting ready for that was, I think we might have 50% women. I think we might have, you know, kind of really beat the odds here, and we have half the caucus is women. So we weren't sure of that. So she was on stage and said, well, now I haven't done the math yet, which of course harkened back to the debates where the premier at the time had said to her, I know math is hard. And that became a very big issue in the campaign. So when she said it in her victory speech on that night, she didn't intend the way the crowd took it, but it was very funny. It was very funny. I haven't done the math yet, but I think we're at 50% women, which indeed we were. And I just want to point out for those of you here, if you're wondering, this image right behind me is the Alberta legislature during the month of Pride, all lit up with Pride colors for the entire month when there is an NDP government there.
Happy times at the Ledge for you.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's those unexpected moments, which bring, well, I mean, the unscripted moments, we don't have a lot of them anymore, which is where the three of you all come in. You know, right now, let's just maybe frame where we are today and then kind of work our way back in the discussion. Right now, we have a minority government. We are in a national health crisis. And given the events of this year, as strategists who kind of see the future before it hits the headlines, what are you thinking and planning in these months leading up to what some people will say inevitably is going to be an election year? Let's start with you, Kevin.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think we're probably going to get an election at some point during 2021. I would think the government knows that they're being judged on how they're handled the pandemic response, both when it comes to protecting the health of Canadians, but also their economic well-being. So I think they need to be able to demonstrate that things are going well in that regard before I think they would be willing to enter an election campaign. You see the polls; the Liberals are ahead, but you know, not overwhelmingly ahead at this point. I would guess the Liberals would want to demonstrate the vaccine rollout is going well and is well in hand before we would see them be interested in an election. So perhaps June at the earliest, more likely maybe September of this year.
Okay. What about you, Anne?
Yeah, I think I agree a lot with what Kevin just said with respect to timing. You know, for me, I think it's you know, we need to demonstrate like we came out of that last election campaign that was in many ways a near-death experience for us. There was we went into it with people thinking that we were going to be wiped out, and we came out with a leader that I think really performed well, and people were surprised by him and so forth. And now since that time, during this pandemic, I think that we've been able to do a lot of things that a lot of Canadians really like. We've been able to push for a lot of policies that are very, very attractive to people. So I think that we're going to go into this next campaign with a record, which is a very, very important thing for us. We'll go in with a record. But I am very interested in what kind of a campaign it's going to be. I've been doing a lot of talking to people who have been through pandemic elections, because it will be a pandemic election. So there's going to be a lot of, we've got a lot of lessons to learn. How do you have a war room? What does the campaign headquarters look like? What is the leaders tour like? What's the balance of communications and events? All of the, how do you do events? All of those kinds of things. So it'll be a very, very different campaign that we'll be going into. But I think we're going to be going into it in a very strong position.
And I guess a lot of that, when you're talking about kind of the tools and the levers you'll have to rely on, will depend on where we're at in the pandemic, because if you don't have herd immunity, I imagine that just is a game changer in how you plan everything.
Well, and I think everything will be about the pandemic. I mean, that is everything.
And where we're at, yeah. Hamish, what about you? So what we've heard is essentially the, you know, how a lot of this isn't in any of your hands, obviously. The vaccine rollout, we're getting good and bad news on a daily basis that has or hasn't anything to do with the government, and there's nothing they can control. But as you see kind of this, is there a rolling strategy? Are you more proactive in how you lock in, or are you more reactive in terms of adjusting your kind of pre-planning as you go along, giving the circumstances of the day?
Well, I think this pandemic is extremely difficult for opposition parties. We've seen that in the elections that have happened, the elections that have happened in this pandemic here in Canada. All governments have been re-elected with strong mandates. This is very, very difficult for opposition parties. It's difficult to say what you would have done differently unless something happens that's specific. And so vaccines, for me, are the big question. And it's why I agree with Kevin. And there's my cat. It's why I agree with Kevin that we're not going to have an election, in the next 3 weeks or 3 months. It'll be much more likely to be in the fall, notwithstanding the 95 Liberal MPs whose pensions vest on October 19th. Is the fact that does the government want the election to be a referendum on their handling of the vaccine? And it's not there yet, but it could very much, it could very much become a tangible example of incompetence if people begin to believe that the reason where our vaccine rollout is woefully behind other Western industrialized countries, which it is the Prime Minister's fault. They don't believe that yet. Some of the groundwork's there. I don't know if that will be the case in May or in April. I don't know if that will be people will be blaming him. But I don't believe there'll be an election when that is an open question. I think the government's going to want to get through all this, be able to say, X percent, high percentage of Canadians have been vaccinated, everybody at risk, everybody over 55 has been vaccinated, and now it's safe to have an election. So vaccine rollout is a huge opportunity for a victory for the government, but it's also a huge danger point.
Okay, so I guess the COVID situation with the pandemic are kind of the external factors. I'd like to pivot for a sec because when you mentioned the pensions in October, they're external factors and then there are internal motivations. So maybe Kevin, you're best suited to answer this one. Mm-hmm. When you want to motivate the troops, money is a pretty good incentive to most people. So the timing on that, when you do the calculation based on, will people want to stick around to hit that target? So will they try harder trying to get there? Or if you've passed that mark and they've already kind of got their financial future padded out a little bit, will the motivation still be there within your ranks?
I wouldn't think that's really a problem with motivation. I think the pension issue means that some people might decide it's time for them to leave politics. I think that's the concern there. People might want to retire and then you have to replace them. I don't think it's a motivation issue for the parties. You'll find, and I worked with some incredible staffers, incredible MPs over the years. This is not a job for them. This is a passion. Politics is what they believe in. And they are, it's closer to a religion than it is a job, right? It's something they really believe in. So there's no problem motivating folks when it's time for an election, when it's time to go to the people and sell your ideas. So I don't think any of the parties are going to have trouble motivating the passion of their MPs, their volunteers, their staff, the incredible staff volunteers that all the parties have.
I think most people would agree with that. But Anne, you talked about a near-death experience. I imagine that the dynamic changed dramatically when you thought you had a winner on your hands. And did that momentum become a virtuous circle of just having everybody get that momentum going for the outcome based on what the passion that people had, but also the notion that they could get there?
Well, there are incredible highs and lows in an election campaign, and at a moment where you feel things starting to shift in a positive way, which I've seen a few times now, it is an unbelievable feeling. It's almost like you can do no wrong, so there was definitely that feeling, particularly after the debates, which I think was people's really first introduction to Jagmeet Singh, and he did well, and people were very impressed by him, and so forth, and so there's this sense that within the campaign, which is why I raised the issue of how campaign headquarters will work. There is that sense within the campaign headquarters because you are in close proximity, and there's that excitement. Like I know with us, for instance, you'd ring the bell whenever you hit a certain number of thousands of dollars coming in, and of course we doubled how much we had anticipated that we were going to be able to bring in as a result of Jagmeet's performance. And so it's really and that sparks other ideas. There's a real kind of creative energy that happens during a campaign. campaign, and it is very exciting. I've seen it a few times. I mean, I saw it in Alberta as well. We saw it in the 2011 campaign when we went from 37 seats to 103 seats. There is a lot of excitement, and it kind of it builds other successes. One success in a campaign builds other successes.
So when you talk about that excitement and the debate, all of you have been in the game long enough to know that you need to break at the right time, right? Like when you're breaking a direction. When you talk about debate, I guess you could look at some of the former debates that when they came too late, for instance, John Turner and Brian Mulroney. John Turner turned the momentum around, but the timing, it wasn't soon enough. Who would like to just speak to that in a situation? Again, for people who don't have your knowledge and kind of want to understand your strategy, what you control, what is beyond your control, and how you respond when you feel you have a moment. Who wants to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, look, in most cases, debates don't matter, right? The number of times that debates have actually made a big difference in Canadian politics has been, you know, in my lifetime, you can probably count them on one hand. You know, there's Jack Layton in 2011 when he attacked Icky for not turning up to work. That was a defining moment. You know, you talk about Mulroney and Turner in '84. You had an option, and then on the flip side, when Turner went after Mulroney in '88 and brought the Liberal Party back from the dead. I mean, those mattered. 1991 in BC with Gordon Wilson putting the Liberal Party on the map. Those are all defining, but the vast majority of debates really have almost no impact. They simply just confirm impressions people have of the leaders and the parties. So it's an opportunity. You know, parties put an unbelievable amount of time into it because it matters. It matters because if you screw it up, it's very, very bad. But the upside is often, unless you get one of those defining kind of knockout punches, the upside is often pretty small. So they can be a turning point, but more often than not, they're not.
You know, I have to say in 2015, I thought I saw a knockout punch when, you know, the Prime Minister and Mr. Mulcair were referring to their opponent as Justin and basically played down his capacity to lead the country. And Tom Mulcair kept saying, "What's your number? What's your number?" And his answer for me was a game changer in terms of showing his capacity to actually be in the moment and take on the task. And I think the way he was characterized almost gave him extra brownie points because they had so underestimated.
Oh yeah, I mean the way the expectations were lowered for Mr. Trudeau before that debate was a massive strategic mistake on behalf of both the Conservatives and the New Democrats, no question.
I remember they said if he shows up with pants on, they'd be surprised, right? So
yeah, it was one of the most ridiculous things ever said.
Yeah.
And I think that long campaign and the fact I think there were 5, 6 debates. I can't remember. They went on forever. Yeah. I think that you know, the Conservatives running ads saying Justin Trudeau, he's not ready. Well, we have these debates and he's holding his own on stage with the other leaders. I demonstrated he was ready and did have the capacity. So that definitely worked in the Prime Minister's favor.
Well, Prime Minister Chrétien was the one I think who really kind of crystallized that whole idea of under promise and over deliver, right? Which I think is it's a classic in politics, right? It's under promise, over deliver all the time. Yeah, and that was a mistake going into those debates. Was you know, the characterization of Mr. Trudeau was I think was a mistake. Yeah.
And the softer side of that, I think the other tactic that was used, that there is a protocol and you usually refer to your opponent in a certain way, and it was Mr. Mulcair, Mr. Harper, and they referred to him as Justin. Again, that was speaking to the kid in pants. So it brings me to another question, and I'm just curious, we can talk about social media and the tools because that's a very obviously in your face part of election campaigning now. But you know, the Right Honourable Herb Gray was a formidable debater, and he was very partisan, but he was always a statesman. And today, to me, it seems that there's this ahistoric approach to politics on the other end of the spectrum from statesmanship that is dominating the arena. Anybody have thoughts on that? And is it good for democracy? Does it matter?
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I think that when we think about the Right Honourable Herb Gray, the word that always comes up, and it's legit, is civility, right? And we have had those kinds of leaders in our House of Commons in the past. And I mean, I would add there are several others. I mean, from our party, I would add people like Bill Blakey, Joe Comartin, Ed Broadbent. Alexa McDonough. We've had very, very civil and committed and passionately partisan, but very, very yeah, civil in the way that they dealt with others. And I think that there, in some ways, I think that there is a mischaracterization of what's going on now, because I think there still is a level of civility. I think that we have kind of rose-colored glasses a bit on the past, and we're not looking accurately enough at a level of cross-partisan, again, you know, like lots of partisanship, but cross-partisan respect that I think does go on.
Yeah, that was something I always enjoyed as a staffer. I got to know some Liberal staffers when I was a junior staffer, and it was good to have lunch with them, you know, once every 3 weeks, once a month, and just kind of, you know, we were working for opposite sides, but we had similar jobs, and it was just useful to, and just good on a human level to connect and kind of, you know, recognize that we're all just people in this. And I think that civility matters a lot. And at various points in my career, knowing people on the other side and having a friendly relationship has saved, I think, you know, it's a lot of trouble. You can call up someone and have an honest conversation. I remember doing stuff in BC years ago, and I got to know, when Carol James was the leader of the NDP, I got to know some of her staff very well and had a great relationship with some of that team. And it made there's multiple times where being able to call on those relationships has smoothed over things that would be unpleasant for everybody.
Okay, I want to just, we're actually running out of time. I can't believe it. We barely, you know, got started on any of this stuff. A few things I would like to ask you. We only have the three parties represented here, which, you know, we haven't, a panel with 5 people is a little bit unwieldy. So the Bloc and the Green Party are not here today. How do you play them in your calculation in the upcoming election? Anybody have thoughts on that in terms of your strategies? Like, what role do they play in your strategy?
Well, I think the Greens will have an outsized role in this election. I think Annamie Paul is a very impressive person. I think that's going to affect the NDP more than it affects the Liberals, but it could eat into Liberal support as well. The Bloc sort of comes and goes, and they're sort of on a coming right now. They're definitely Blanchette helped them rise in the last election, but we'll see whether that changes or not. Quebecers often fall in love with the Bloc and fall out of love pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, the Bloc are definitely at their sort of high water mark right now, and I think that actually goes into the speculation about election timing as well. I think that they are very happy with the position that they're in right now, and I think that they're connecting themselves very closely to the provincial government in Quebec as well. So I can't see them going much beyond where they are right now, to be honest, but, you know, things happen or whatever. I think that there is a lot of space right now being given to the new leader of the Green Party. It is true that the Green Party is often hyped up a lot between elections and even tends to poll quite well between elections, but doesn't necessarily come to fruition in the actual election campaign.
So the conversion's not there. Okay, we're going to have to go into speed round here because we have so much I'm sure people want to talk about. I know populism is high on the list, but I think it's been exhausted in the media. So I'd like to focus on what you're really good at. One thing that we can note when an election is around the corner, pollsters become the cool kids on the block. How much does polling leading up to and during the election play into your strategies on a daily and weekly basis?
Well,
or do you look at the overarching?
I'm a pollster. I believe I'm the only pollster on the panel. I've never been the cool kid on the block, that's for sure. Look, polling matters a lot.
You are today, Hamish.
Yeah. Polling is very important. I believe you can learn a lot from it, but I think there's a mistake that a lot of people early in politics and the media make is they focus on the horse race number. I don't really care what the horse race number is, how many people are voting for you today. It's all about identifying what issues are driving people, what triggers are out there that you can push people to be more likely to vote for you or less likely to vote for the other side, and identifying those and pushing those, knowing where you are. I remember working for a campaign once where they had us polling up until the morning of election day so they could tell the leader how the election was going to go. I'm like, I'll take the money, but it's a waste of money because it doesn't, you only should poll to make a decision. And that's the most important thing is if you genuinely have a question about whether you should do X or Y and polling can help, polling is very, very helpful. but you shouldn't use it just to know things and feel like you're the cool kid on the block.
So is that an interplay between like polling and policy or polling and politics when you talk about making a decision?
I mean, it's a bit of everything. I've never really seen polling kill a policy idea altogether, but we might decide to de-emphasize or really emphasize a policy decision, an idea that might go from being minor in a platform to being a big plank, or vice versa, depending on what people say how important that sort of thing is to them.
And in public domain polling, I look primarily at leader approvals and demographics.
Why is that, Anne?
Because leader approvals are, I mean, people, you know, like there's that the political brain idea, the Drew Weston's book, about people often are very emotional, and how they feel about you is as important as what your policies are. So, you know, I always say that if it came down to policy, we would be in government all the time because our policies are very popular. But what really I think crystallizes things is, how do people feel about your leader? Do they feel that your leader is compassionate, cares about you, is smart, is motivated by the right things? That's what matters in terms of looking at your leader. And then I know one of the things I'm looking at right now is the incredible youth support for Jagmeet Singh, and also the gender gap.
Okay. Kevin, I would like to ask you, you know, we just have, you know, a few minutes here.
Sure.
What are the levers you anticipate you'll be able to pull in a virtual election, if that's what we are up against, or a hybrid virtual election, that you didn't have before?
Well, I think the reality is you know, you're not going to be able to have these big events where people are hugging and jostling crowds and whatnot. And unfortunately, that's Justin Trudeau's strength, is with people. But I think he's also very good online. He's also good with videos, with new technologies. The Liberal Party really pioneered a great digital strategy and outreach. I know they spend most of their advertising on digital outreach. And I think that's what the focus is going to be. You're going to reach people the same way that they're reaching their work right now. It's through their computers, and it's their phones, and it's online. So I think a heavy use of digital campaigning will be part of the election campaign.
Okay, and one of my pet peeves I have to ask you before we go, why the talking points?
So I agree with you.
That's directed at everyone, not at you.
No, I agree that politicians always sound better when they sound like a real human being when they're answering questions. You know, they're given talking points from the staff because the staff wants them to say the right thing and not do the wrong thing and have to go apologize, like Scott Reed said in his story earlier on. And,
yeah.
But you know, take an example of like Carla Qualtrough. I think she's a fantastic minister, and one of her strengths is she sounds like a normal person when she's answering in media interviews, and I think that's fantastic.
I think the message frame is more important than the talking points. And I always used to say when I was a candidate that that's your lifeline. When you're on a panel and you get hit with something and you don't know what they're talking about, you hang on to your frame.
And that was what the Grey Fog was very good at.
Yeah, he would. I don't accept the premise of the question. I remember he used to say, if you asked him a speculative question, a hypothetical question, he would say, yeah, and if my grandmother had wheels, she'd be a bus. I'm not quite, I still understand what it is, but that's what Herb would say.
Well, you know what, there's so much more we could cover, but I think we have to leave on that positive note because it was an Herb Gray moment. And I want to thank everybody who has joined us here tonight. Big thank you to the political staffers and pugilists who took off their gloves to share some of their stories with you. I wish there was more time because I'm sure there's so much more that you could offer, and we'll have to do this again. So Anne McGrath, Kevin Bosch, Hamish Marshall. I'd like to thank Jackie, Scott, Jim, Bill, Dan, and Laura for sharing your tales from the trenches, for the video that we played, and to all of you in the audience for your patience during COVID and for taking the time to talk to us. A special thank you to the Gray family for establishing this very, very poignant lecture series in honor of a great parliamentarian. The Right Honourable Herb Gray Lecture is a signature event in the Carleton Riddell Graduate Program of Political Management. It is intended to engage the community in political discourse on contemporary issues facing Canada and the world. Carleton University wants to thank the many donors who support this important lecture named in honor of a distinguished politician and person of integrity. We've been hearing that word over and over again, and it is, I think, today inspirational and aspirational. Please visit Carleton University's future funder giving site for more information on supporting the lecture. We hope to see you in person for the next lecture in the series. Until then, be well and stay healthy. And for students, there's going to be another open discussion for you after this. Thank you very much. Have a good 2021, and remember to vote.